Hi everyone, this is Jim. I just finished up a tournament in my local chess club, and I thought I would show you all the games from the tournament that I played. It's a 5 round tournament, and I actually only played 3 of the rounds, but we'll go through all of those games and do the kind of whole tournament treatment that I do when I go to one of these tournaments, one of these weekend tournaments that's away. I haven't done one of those this year, so all this is kind of making up for that. Now, it turns out in this tournament, round one was played about a month ago, and I already did the video on my round one game. And so in this video, I'm going to be talking about the game in round three. I took a bye in round two. And as part of the setup for the round three game, I'm going to give away the result of what happened in round one. So if you want to keep the suspense and view these games in order, and you haven't seen my round one game, you can go back and check that out now. I just renamed it. It's now called Flying Man Swiss Round 1 Catalan Opening. But if you remember, I did a video about a month ago on an over-the-board game I played in the Catalan Opening, and it's the same video. I just renamed it to make it part of this series on the tournament. And yeah, so you can stop the video here. I'll put a pointer to it also in the description of this video, and go check out that video if you want to see what happened in round one without hearing about it in advance, if you want to keep the suspense. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get on to the setup of my round three game. Well, first let's do a little setup of the tournament as a whole. So this is what's been happening with my rating recently. Last year, in October of last year, my rating reached an all-time high of 1933. I was very happy with that. In fact, my whole 2018 was a good year. It started off, let's see, well, it started off with a losing tournament or two, just one, I guess, where my rating dropped all the way down to 1766. But from that point forward, it increased. I had some good results in there, and hit the high of 1933 in October. But since then, I played in 5 tournaments, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I lost about 20 points in each one. So I'm down to 1826, about 100 points below my all-time high. And I would like to reverse that trend. So that is the setup for the tournament as a whole. And then in my first round game, I lost that first round game. Now the tournaments at the local chess club, sometimes they're all one big tournament. That's when they have the chess championship. It's an open. Sometimes other tournaments are open tournaments as well. But usually they're divided into 2 sections, and this is one of those tournaments. So I was in the upper section. That's everybody rated 1700 and above. And as you can see, I'm near the bottom of that section. So in the first round in the Swiss system tournament, you're paired up against a higher rated player, typically if you're in the bottom half of the tournament. And there are some strong players in the club. There's a number of experts and even a couple of masters. So it's a pretty strong upper division there. Tough for me anyway. So I lost that first round game. I took a bye in the second round game, and here we are in the third round, and I'm paired up against a lower rated player. So my rating for this tournament is 1826, as you just saw, and my opponent's rating is 1715, so about a 100-point difference. And, if I want to have any chance of having a good result in this tournament, this is pretty much a must-win game for me. And I have the black pieces. So my opponent starts off with e4. I go c5, and he plays c3. And right here, I will point out one of those things that makes weekend tournaments different from these club tournaments, where in a club tournament, you just play one game a week. And so you're coming in to the game after a long day. They start around 7:45. And you're sometimes a bit distracted. So my normal line against the Alapin Sicilian, which is what white has played here, that c3 move is the Alapin Sicilian, my normal line is to play knight f3. And what that's trying to do is it's trying to exploit the fact that there's no good way to defend that pawn. White's pawn structure here, when he played c3, he's taken away those 2 squares from the knight. And so the knight doesn't have its most natural developing moves that it is often played to support the pawn on e4. So the main moves against it are to play d5 to try and undermine it that way, or to play knight f6. And so the line I learned was the knight f6 line, and it goes something like this: knight f6, pawn here, knight here, and then there's different ways white can play from here. Maybe pushing the pawn forward, maybe developing the knight, maybe bringing the bishop out. all those moves get played in some order. And it's a useful line to know because you can also use it against the Smith-Morra gambit. It's a way of declining the Smith-Morra. Anyway, I did not think about that at this point in the game. I guess I was just a little bit confused. And like I said, that sometimes happens. Whereas I wanted to compare that and contrast that with a weekend tournament. When you go to a weekend tournament, even if you're maybe you didn't sleep so well in the hotel the night before, maybe you're tired from traveling, but you have more of a focus on the games. But sometimes you come in to one of these club tournaments after a long day and you're not that focused. And that was the case here. I played the move knight c6. And this is a kind of a blunder. I suppose it's not an awful move, but it puts me into a line that I don't know. Let's see. He continued with knight f3. And then I played d6. So there is still actually a chance to kind of fix my mistake here. The chess engine says there's a couple interesting moves for black in this position. e5 is a move here. Just block the center. And then try and clamp down on the d4 push, which is White's idea with the Alapin Sicilian. So it looks like an interesting way to play. So the move I played, knight c3 is not unplayable, but it has to be followed up. The other way I could have followed it up is I could have followed it up with knight f6. And after e5, knight d5, this would transpose back into the usual line in the Alapin Sicilian that I play. So that would have been okay as well. But anyway, I didn't think of either of those. Actually, I did think about the move e5 for a little bit, but I just wasn't sure about it. And after knight f6, I also didn't realize that it was going to just transpose back into a known line in the Alapin. I just wasn't sure if my pieces might get knocked out of position. So I went with d6, trying to stop the pawn from coming down, and then I was going to follow up with knight f6. But that lets White play d4 immediately. And after this exchange, this is basically the kind of position that the Alapin player is looking for. So I've kind of given White everything he wanted out of the opening. So in this must-win game, this is not a very good start. But even though White has a big advantage here, it's not decisive necessarily, particularly with players at this level. Let's see. So I could continue with knight f6. The chess engine says I really ought to try knight f6 here. But anyway, I was thinking about this position, trying to figure out how I could develop and not get my pieces kicked around. I want to play the move e6 actually, but it blocks in this bishop. So I was looking for another way to develop my dark squared bishop. So I played g6. So we continue on with some, I think, fairly normal moves for a while. I'm just worse here, and White is better, and nothing really changes. White stays better through the next sequence of moves. So my opponent, who is a young man, by the way, is playing very seriously, thinking about his moves, not dashing out anything quickly, and he's maintaining his advantage here. So I think he's doing a good job. Let's see. I played bishop g7. He went bishop e3. Go bishop d7. So we're just getting our pieces out. He castles, and now I go e6. I finally gave up. I could not. Let's back up here. I just maybe when I played bishop d7 here, this is already like giving up in finding a good square for this bishop. But the bishop comes out here and he kicks it. It's just going to have to retreat anyway, and it can't come to this square or it'll get forked. So I just ran out of squares for this bishop and ended up putting it on d7 and playing e6 anyway. So it is locked in behind the pawn chain, and part of why White has an advantage. White also has easy development and space for his pieces. So I just have a cramped position, but I do have a space for everything. And also I managed to get this here in time so that if he pushes the d pawn forward, my knight at least can come to this e5 square and supported by the bishop, so it doesn't get traded off and I don't get pawn damage. So I feel like I can survive this position, and I think it's it's cramped and White is better, but it's probably still playable for black. I go knight e7. He goes queen d2. But I certainly should have done better in the opening. And then I get castled. So we finally complete our development. And he goes to trade off my dark squared bishop, which makes sense. This is a good piece in this structure. This bishop here is not looking very powerful, but this bishop has some targets, so might as well trade it off. And I don't really have much to do to avoid that. I just keep developing, put my rook on a good file there. He takes, I take, and he plays bishop to d3. So he drops the bishop back. He's maybe afraid of some discoveries. There's maybe a potential of playing knight here, hitting the bishop, something like that. So he just drops it back voluntarily. I played a6. Yeah, that might have been an awkward move, actually, to beat the immediate knight here. He moves the bishop, and then I could take here and mess up his pawn structure. So probably a good choice to retreat that bishop here. Played a6. I'm keeping his knight from coming into this square and putting pressure on my d-pawn, which is actually a little bit awkward to defend. I might have to drop my bishop back like that. So that's the trouble with these cramped positions. You sometimes have trouble figuring out how to defend everything. Let's see. He played rook f to e1, lining up, centralizing his rooks. Makes sense. I played with b5. That also keeps the knight. The knight potentially had an idea of coming in like this, and now my queen was covering that square, so it would have required some setup. But anyway, it takes that square away from his knight. And it also gives me an idea. I'm thinking maybe my knight can come here and go to c4 there, and that might be a good outpost for it. Of course, he can control it with the b3 move, and maybe he should, but he played a3 instead. So, but still nothing has gone wrong here. I go queen to b6, and white is still better. I am threatening to take this pawn here. Knight and the bishop are ganging up on it, and he decided to defend the pawn in an active way. The chess engine would just kind of passively defend, if you want to put it that way. Just drop the bishop back here to c2. Now the queen and the knight are defending it, and white still holds on to all these good squares. So white is not doing anything particularly active there, but just holding on to his advantages, and presumably some maneuvering would occur after this where white would try to exploit that advantage in space. But it's not like there's an immediate breakthrough here. Anyway, my opponent, instead of playing that way, he played with d5. And this actually gives me a chance to equalize here. Although I didn't find the best move. I was still thinking about this knight d4, and I kind of realized, that's a good square for the knight, maybe even if I don't win a pawn. And I went there anyway. But after he played d5 here, I have another option with this knight. The knight could have gone to e5. It doesn't have to go to d4 just because I'd been thinking about it. It could have gone to this square. And this seems to be about even. White can take, I take back. And then the chess engine is recommending actually king h1, probably to prepare pushing forward on the queen side and trying to break things up here. Now it looks a bit funny, I have to admit, to have these doubled pawns here. But often that's okay. I mean, he can't really get to this pawn, and maybe they'll just end up getting traded off. And if the pawn comes forward, I can just take it. It'll be even if it's defended and it comes forward, it'll be inside my camp, and I probably have ways to round it up. So this position is not as big an advantage to white as previously. So that's why the chess engine here, if we back up to this move, this is a place where the chess engine would just kind of sit on the position and not push anything forward. But anyway, my opponent went with knight d5, and I didn't play the best response. I played with knight to d4 here. I just thought that was an interesting move. But it is not the best. Let's see. He took, and I took. This is what I kind of liked about this position. I saw that I'd be getting this pin on this bishop, and maybe I could find some way to exploit the pressure on the d-pawn here. My queen and my knight are both looking at it, as well as this pawn. He came up with an interesting defense here, though, and one that I hadn't expected. He played the move queen to e3. Now, I don't think queen e3 is best there. I think actually best is to just go ahead and take, and then play the knight back, kick my queen away. That's really knight e2 is kind of the move I was expecting in this position. I didn't know during the game whether he should take first or not, but the chess engine definitely recommends taking first and then kicking the queen back. And that still seems to be better for white. So my knight d4 move was not the best there, and white still has an edge in this position. I can drop my queen back and defend that pawn, but it is an isolated pawn, and it's somewhat backwards. It's in my camp, and he can pile up on it. So it gives white a target to play against, and white doesn't have any similar weaknesses. He's got this e4 pawn, but it's actually connected to these pawns on the king side. He can play f3 to support it after he unpins here. So anyway, that would be best play. Instead, he played queen e3. I think maybe, because my opponent is lower rated, sometimes those lower rated players like to trade a lot and try and make it difficult for you to win by just taking all the force off the board. But in this case, the trade just results in an equal position, whereas before he had an advantage. And so he really should have gone for that other line. Let's see. So he offered the trade, and I should take it. I should just take the queen and go for this position. But for the same reason as he wanted the queens off, I wanted to keep them on. I wanted to keep it a complicated position where I would have more winning chances. And as a result of that, I make my second blunder. We'll call that original knight c6 move I played at the beginning my first blunder. This will be my second one. I retreated my queen to avoid the trade. And this opens up a tactic for white. So if you want to pause the video here, see if you can spot the tactic. What's the best move for white? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now, so last chance to pause the video. Okay, the move he played, which was actually not the best move, the move he played was here. So if you spotted that idea, that's a good idea. It's like a fork. It's hitting this pawn, and it's hitting this pawn. And it does eventually win the pawn, but I do get to complicate things a little bit after that. The fastest move, or the best move there, is actually queen all the way to a7, because I have this loose bishop in my camp, and so this fork is just more powerful. I have to defend the bishop somehow or move it, and then he can grab this pawn. And this bishop doesn't have many squares, so maybe I bring a rook over to defend. And then this pawn looks pretty weak after that. So he might even win 2 pawns in that line. So that would be winning. I think queen to a7 there would just be winning. But, I think this is an interesting kind of blunder. There's another similar one later in the game. And they're pretty typical of the kind of mistake that I would make and many class players would make. It's if you look at this position where I'm thinking about my move, he can't actually put his queen here. That's not an option. It becomes an option only because of my move. So the move I made, which I was looking at all the things it does, like getting my queen over to the king side, getting it where he won't trade it off, and maybe I can get something going over here. I was failing to look at the weaknesses of the move. I was looking at the positive aspects of the move and not the things that were wrong with it. So that's a lesson, and I think that's a common mistake. When before you make your move, you say, well, what's the disadvantage of that move? What is my opponent going to do to exploit that move? And maybe you'll catch a few of those. So anyway, that was my blunder. He played queen b6, as I said. He didn't quite get the best response there, but this is good enough to give white an advantage, and a bigger advantage that he had before. Maybe this is winning. It's hard to tell. It's still complicated. So I took here. Taking is nice because it's going to create some weaknesses here, a weak pawn on the d5 square that I can maybe exploit later. It also defends this pawn, so I'm not losing my center pawn. And he can take here, but maybe not right away because I will take this pawn. So it kind of buys me a little bit of time. He takes back. And it also protects one of the 2 pawns. So if I could find a way to protect this pawn, then I would be in good shape. But I still have a problem along this second row here. So I can't play a move to defend this pawn right now because queen will come in, and attack along the second row. And if the bishop moves out of the way, notice that the rook and the queen would be coordinating on my knight there, and I still have that loose bishop. So I need to deal with all of these problems, and I came up with the move bishop f5, which I think actually these moves were relatively the best moves. So I was finding after he played queen b6, I think I found the best defense in that situation. At least the chess engine seemed to approve. So I'm just threatening to take his bishop, so he has to take. And then I take back with the knight. And now finally he can take that pawn. And I think I'll be able to defend the other pawn somehow. Actually, I'm not sure how I could defend it now that I look at this. Maybe I get a pawn somewhere else. Maybe if he grabs that pawn, I can get this pawn or something. Anyway, or maybe knight here would. No, you know, when he takes here, he's got both the queen and the knight looking at that pawn. So yeah, still a tricky position. But my opponent spotted an interesting idea here. And so this is finally his turn to make a mistake. But it's interesting because it's the same kind of mistake I just talked about. He played this move, which looks like a strong move at first, right? It hits my queen, and it wins the d pawn here, which is a center pawn, and then he'll have this passed pawn in the center of the board. Looks very strong, but he left a pawn hanging here. And so this actually lets me equalize. So this is the move that gets me off the hook. And once again, it's another move where you have to think about what are the positive aspects, but also what are the weaknesses of that move. And if he had stopped to think, you know, what's going to happen, what am I exposing when I move that piece away, he might have realized he had exposed that pawn here. So let's see, I had a line here. The chess engine says, let's see, he can take here. I could play the move queen to g5. This is the way I get counterplay. So instead of immediately going for the pawn here, he takes a moment out to get his king a little bit more secure. I come in here and hit this pawn. Queen takes here, queen takes here. And this is best play according to the chess engine. And then rook e2 chasing my queen away. And the queen drops back to h4. So I'm just one pawn down, but white is still better. And you know, these passed pawns on the queen side that are connected look very dangerous. So unless I can get something going against the king here, I could be in trouble. But that's best play here. So this blunder lets me off the hook. He plays knight e4, and I play queen takes b2. And he gets to grab this pawn here, but I trade it off. He takes back, and then I played rook c to d8, thinking I would just round up this pawn. And this works out okay for me, but there is actually a stronger move here if you want to think about what you might play as black here. Okay, I'm giving the answer away. If you want to think about it some more, pause the video. But the chess engine recommends the move rook to c2 in this position. So queen and the rook are piling up on the f2 pawn. And, well, the chess engine doesn't defend right away. It plays here. And, oh, it's the other rook. It plays rook a to d1. Defending that center pawn and maybe trying to push it forward. And then after taking, then queen to g3 comes back and defends everything. And now this is threatening to come through. And this seems to be about equal. So it seems like there's play for both sides here. Interesting kind of position. I didn't play this way. I actually thought about the move rook c2 in the game. And I was worried about this. You know, what if he just starts chasing my queen around? But it turns out I can run here. And, well, if he chases me again, I could come in here and mate him. So he can't do that. He has to deal with that threat. Rook to f1. And then I can drop my queen back to f6. And that is apparently okay for me. Hard to tell, right? He could trade here. And then he's still got this passed pawn that looks dangerous. But my king, by the trade, my king gets closer to that pawn. And my rook is nearby. So maybe I get to round up that pawn. Anyway, I think that's all in the range of about equal, or maybe a little better for black. So I played the move rook c to d8. Not, as I said, I wasn't sure about that line where he starts chasing my queen. And here is the next mistake. So he could once again just take here, and I take here, and this seems to be an even position. So we're in the range of about even here. But instead he played queen e5, and I think it's that thing about the lower rated player wanting to trade off the pieces. It's just a mistake in this position because it leaves me slightly better here. I mean, the trade is forced, so he gets rid of the queen. But then, well, I can blockade this pawn and defend all of my pawns, and he's actually going to have trouble holding on to this pawn, as we'll see. Let's see, he played f4 here to defend his rook. It could have tried rook to c1 there. This is an interesting try. Rook to c1, maybe thinking of coming into the c6 square. But in every line, black is just a little bit better at this point because my pawns are just a little better coordinated. These two are connected over here, and I have these three over here by the king. Let's see, he played f4, and I doubled up on this pawn. He came over to defend. Sorry, came over to defend. And then now I have the idea of just chasing the rook off of this, this line here with my pawns and winning that pawn. So it's kind of a straightforward procedure, but I can't push immediately because he has some ideas here, like rook coming to attack my rook, or maybe rook here with check. Have to be pretty careful how I do that. I guess it's the rook with check that I was most worried about, driving my king back, and then maybe coming over here and attacking these pawns. So so I first played rook 8 to d7, just setting up that pawn push. He played king to f2, and now I go f6. And now at this point, he can't hold on to the pawn anymore. He tried rook to e8. I went to rook takes d5. He takes. Oh, he didn't take. I think he should have just taken. This line looks okay. I mean, I'm better, but maybe he can put up a fight this way. Rook takes. He gets the rook here with check. And let's see, I go here to try and keep my king active. He can go here to go after this pawn. And I can activate this rook this way. Probably, well, you know, black is a little better here, but it's a complicated position. And I think white is a little better than he was in the game. Instead, he played an interesting move here. He played something tactical. He played rook to e7 check. So for a second, I was worried. Because if I just move my king away, he can take this rook, and he'll just be a rook up. So, but then I realized, oh, I just take. And he takes, and it's just a trade. But I get to keep my rook on the 7th rank. So this is a worse trade than the one he had before. So after he took, I put my rook behind my potential passed pawn. And I'm just going to try and make a win here. It's not clear if I can win, but I certainly have the winning chances in this position. Played king e3. I played a5, just started pushing these pawns forward. Played king to d3, bringing his king over to defend. And then I went here with b4. b4 seems to be a mistake, although it seems to me to be a natural move. But let's give the line the chess engine has here first. It likes the move h5. And then after g3, king to h6. Say rook to d6, attacking the pawn. King back to g7. Rook to a6, getting behind this pawn. Now b4. Takes, and king to c2. And, you know, white is still better, but it's not clear if white can win this. This is one of those tricky kind of positions where, you know, white is in front of the pawn. I'm behind it, so I have winning chances here. If my rook were in front of the pawn, I think it might be a complete draw. But anyway, the tricky position. There's other ideas here. Let's see. After b4, he could play a4, and then I push on with b3, and then he can take this pawn. I think, yeah, this is the line. This is the line where he gets rook b5 in. Oh, yeah, it's not in time. This a4 move doesn't work in this line, and I get the queen. So that's a line where I win. So he can't play a4 there. So that was why taking Taking was the move. Okay, but let's go back to the game. That idea is going to come up again here in just a second. So I played the move b4, and right here is the move that white has to draw, and that's the move a4. So this is an interesting idea. If I push on with the b pawn, then he plays rook b5. And now if I trade rooks and push the pawn, his king is just in time to stop me. You know, I'm going to queen before he does, but if his king gets that pawn, then I lose. So, so that is b4 is a bit of a mistake, and a4 is the way to refute it. And if I can't push the pawn, then there's just no way for me to make progress. So a4, it's a bit of a counterintuitive move, but the thing to remember is it's preparing this square for the rook. Anyway, in this position, he played the move I thought he might have played. It's the move I calculated. He played the move rook takes pawn. You know, I pushed this pawn, leaving this pawn hanging. But I had already figured that I can push on to b3. And now, as we saw on the other line, it's too late for him to play a4 and rook to b5 there, because I will push my pawn, and then if he interposes, I'll take the rook and queen. But what else can he do? He tried queen to c3, king to c3, and then I played b2, and then he resigned. So that's how the game ended. So after 3 rounds, I have 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 bye. And so that's about break even in terms of my rating. And so whether it's a good tournament or a bad tournament, for me, depends on what happens in the next 2 rounds. So, so of the next 2 rounds, one of the games was a forfeit, and so there's only 1 more game to go, and I will bringing that to you shortly. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I will see you then. Bye.